Mistress framed pregnant wife for murder millionaire, only learned the truth on her deathbed. They say love and loyalty bind a marriage, but what if hidden betrayals and carefully crafted lies threaten to tear it all apart? Today, I invite you into a world where a secret mistress manipulates her way into the life of a wealthy businessman, framing his innocent, pregnant wife for murder. Deception lurks in every corner of their stately home, and truth remains locked behind carefully drawn curtains. How far will a scheming woman go to claim a billionaire's heart and fortune for herself? Stay tuned, because the shocking reality behind this twisted tale will leave you breathless and searching for answers. Alexander Cunningham was never one to crave the limelight. He was born into it. His family name, etched into the annals of high society, stood for wealth, influence, and philanthropy. Educated in prestigious institutions across Europe, Alexander returned home with a vision of expanding his family's business empire. At 32, he was charming, driven, and, some said, unstoppable. His ventures included everything from luxury, real estate, to technology investments. And though the tabloids painted him as a playboy billionaire, those who truly knew him said he was kind and sentimental, a trait inherited from his late mother, who once donated half her inheritance to build educational centers in underserved neighborhoods. It was during a charity gala at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, an event he himself hosted to raise money for leukemia. Research that Alexander first laid eyes on Evelyn Hargrave. She was hardly the typical socialite. Reserved but graceful, she came to represent her father's law firm, offering pro bono legal services to children's hospitals. There was an innocence to her that drew Alexander in. She had dark hair, a gentle smile, and a warmth that made everyone around her feel safer, more at ease. When their gazes finally met, a current ran between them that no one else at the gala seemed to notice. Alexander politely introduced himself, but Evelyn hardly recognized him, having grown up in a middle-class family with little interest in tabloid gossip. Her obliviousness was refreshing to him. He was used to women who already knew his net worth and had expectations. That night, conversation flowed easily about their shared aspirations for philanthropic work. Before long, they were talking about small personal details, her childhood in a Boston suburb, his experiences studying in Paris, her passion for pro bono legal advocacy. By the end of the evening, Alexander's thoughts revolved around little else but Evelyn. A whirlwind romance followed. Over candlelit dinners in quiet, upscale restaurants, they shared stories of past heartbreaks and childhood dreams. At times, they'd take midnight strolls along the Chicago waterfront, admiring the skyline's reflection in the water. Soon, those stolen moments replaced society's usual pomp and grandeur. Even as the press clamored for exclusives, the couple kept much of their relationship private. Those close to Alexander saw a man transformed. He laughed more freely, cancelled fewer personal commitments, and spoke passionately about the future he and Evelyn would build together. After a year of growing closer, Alexander proposed in his family's ancestral estate. The location was symbolic, a rose garden planted by his mother. That day, as the sunset bathed them in shades of gold and soft purple, he knelt on one knee. Evelyn's acceptance came through joyful tears, and they sealed their promise with a tender kiss. The wedding itself was held at a quaint chapel in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, marking not just a union of two souls, but also a testament to pure love untouched by material trappings. If only things had stayed that simple, if only fate and human jealousy hadn't conspired to disrupt their bliss. Newlyweds in a sprawling mansion, Alexander and Evelyn reveled in the early days of their marriage. The property, an expansive estate featuring manicured gardens, A stable of Arabian horses and a staff of discreet housekeepers felt like a dream. Although grand, it was also surprisingly cozy. Evelyn had a gift for making any space feel like home. With her intuitive sense of interior design, she replaced stiff formalities with warm comfort, changing the ambience from museum-like to welcoming. Alexander's extended family admired Evelyn's gentle nature, especially his father, Gregory Cunningham, whose health was declining. He'd been a rigorous businessman with little tolerance for excuses, but Evelyn's kindness melted his stoic demeanor. Even the staff adored her for treating them like friends rather than employees. The outside world, though, saw them as a golden couple worthy of tabloids and gossip magazines. Every glitzy function they attended, every vacation they took, and every philanthropic move they made was documented and scrutinized. But beneath the veneer of perfection, cracks were forming. Alexander's wealth and responsibilities meant he traveled often, overseeing corporate expansions, negotiating high-stakes deals, and forging global partnerships. He was gone for weeks at a time, leaving Evelyn in the mansion. While the staff and her father-in-law offered companionship, the isolation and constant media attention weighed heavily. She missed the simplicity of her old life, a time when she could walk down a street without cameras. Despite her best efforts, loneliness began to eat at her. Evelyn tried to busy herself with charitable endeavors, volunteering at local shelters and children's wards, just as she had done before marriage. However, people looked at her differently now, always aware of her status as Mrs. Cunningham. She noticed that some colleagues fawned over her, others were suspicious of her intentions, and the press hounded her for superficial stories. She wanted to maintain a normal life, but found it nearly impossible within the bubble of wealth and fame. During those long nights in the estate, she'd wait by the phone for Alexander's calls or watch some late-night talk show, seeking distraction. While her feelings of longing were legitimate, Evelyn never suspected that Alexander's frequent absences would create an opening for a more sinister force to walk into their marriage. At social functions, rumor had it that Alexander's charming persona had gained him more than just business contracts. There were whispers of flirtations, unsubstantiated talk that he had entertained certain acquaintances a bit too warmly. Evelyn tended to brush aside such rumors. She trusted her husband. After all, he had promised unwavering loyalty, and every conversation they shared reminded her of how much he cared. But reality does not always align with hope, and sometimes the smallest seeds of discontent can be nurtured by jealousy and greed until they grow into a forest of deception. In this case, that seed took root in the form of a woman named Sienna Royce, a cunning opportunist who saw in Alexander Cunningham not just a chance for love, but a golden ticket to power. Sienna Royce worked as a high-level consultant at one of Alexander's affiliated companies, a marketing firm that handled promotions for his various ventures. Tall, statuesque, and brilliant in her field, Sienna was one of those people everyone seemed to notice. She commanded attention not only because of her striking features, raven black hair, emerald green eyes, but also her keen ability to read a room and manipulate its energy in her favor. She could transform a mere business pitch into an unforgettable experience with her wit and unwavering confidence. Alexander was first intrigued by her work ethic. While investigating stagnant growth in one division of his conglomerate, he consulted the marketing firm. Sienna's proposals were revolutionary. She identified untapped demographics and devised campaigns that leveraged social media trends. She seemed to predict consumer behavior before it occurred, and that prescience made her indispensable in Alexander's eyes. He praised her openly during board meetings and financed her ambitious projects. Behind that professional admiration, Sienna harbored deeper ambitions. She had grown up in modest means. Her father was a factory worker. Her mother, a seamstress. She saw wealth as the ultimate security, the ticket out of a life defined by financial struggle. The moment she stepped into the world of corporate opulence, she became determined to climb to the top. She networked relentlessly, charmed CEOs, and built an image of unstoppable success. In Alexander, she spotted more than a charismatic client. She saw the culmination of her aspirations. Their association turned personal after a particularly demanding business trip to Hong Kong. After final negotiations, Sienna invited Alexander to join her for a drink in the lounge. One drink became two, and conversation flowed from professional updates to personal anecdotes. Alexander spoke about Evelyn, but Sienna listened with an unreadable expression, carefully tucking away the details of his marriage. In that moment, she decided she would have him married or not. The actual affair began subtly. Flirty texts about marketing strategies late at night, a casual hand on his arm during business lunches, eyes lingering a second too long. Alexander, lonely and exhausted, found himself drawn to Sienna's vivacity. She seemed to understand the pressures of running a business empire in a way Evelyn, sweet as she was, could not. Soon, stolen kisses in secluded corners replaced innocuous banter. Their first real indiscretion happened during a conference in Dubai, where they ended up in a lavish hotel suite. A single night that should never have happened, but it did, and for Sienna, it was only the beginning. Yet the affair remained clandestine, at least at first. Alexander was plagued by guilt, repeatedly reminding himself that he loved Evelyn. But Sienna proved too tempting, a kind of forbidden fruit that both thrilled and disgusted him. Meanwhile, Sienna had no intention of staying a secret side piece. She wanted everything: Alexander's love, his money, and the status of being the woman on his arm in public. The mistress had arrived on the scene, and she was ready to destroy anything in her path. Ironically, amidst the swirling storm of Alexander's infidelity, a piece of joyful news arrived. Evelyn was pregnant. She had been feeling ill for weeks, morning sickness that wouldn't subside. Alexander had just returned from yet another trip, this one to Los Angeles, when she broke the news with trembling excitement. As she whispered, "We're having a baby," tears glistened in her eyes. In that instant, Alexander's heart stopped. Overwhelmed by guilt and happiness in equal measure, he drew her into a tight embrace, whispering sweet reassurances. She laughed and cried at once, a mix of relief and anticipation. For a moment, Alexander felt the weight of his deception crushing him. As word spread, excitement filled the estate. Gregory Cunningham, though weakened by age and illness, was elated at the prospect of a grandchild. Staff members eagerly offered their congratulations, and a sense of renewal took hold. Alexander promised himself he would end the affair with Sienna. This new life demanded his unwavering devotion. This child deserved nothing less, but Sienna had other plans. She found out about Evelyn's pregnancy through a slip of gossip at work. A colleague congratulated her on her boss's new family news, not realizing Sienna had any interest in Alexander's personal life. In that moment, a burning jealousy ignited within her. She cornered Alexander in his office one afternoon, demanding to know why he'd kept the pregnancy from her. He tried to explain that he intended to be a faithful husband and father, that they had to end their affair. This was all it took for Sienna's carefully masked ambition and rage to come roaring to the surface. She refused to accept his decision. She said she loved him, that she had given her best years to him professionally and personally. She refused to be cast aside now. Alexander insisted it was over, that the child changed everything. Yet Sienna simply stood there, silent, her eyes shimmering with resentment. She vowed to make him regret his choice if he dared to abandon her. Despite his own turmoil, Alexander felt a renewed sense of duty to Evelyn. He poured himself into husbandly tasks, attending doctor's appointments, helping choose the nursery decor, even scaling back his business trips so he could be present for every milestone. In the evenings, he'd soothe Evelyn through her nausea, warming soup and rubbing her back. She saw a transformation in him. He became more tender, more attentive. Unaware of the heartbreak that loomed just below the surface, Evelyn believed their marriage had entered a new, beautiful phase. Sienna, however, simmered in the background, scheming. She nurtured her anger like a twisted seed, determined to sow chaos in Alexander's life. She believed she could reclaim him, or at the very least, destroy what he had built with Evelyn. And so, in the shadows of that grand estate, as the couple prepared for the greatest joy of their lives, a plan of unspeakable malice took shape, a plan that would leave Evelyn framed for a crime she did not commit. Tension hovered thick in the air when Sienna appeared at the estate under the pretext of delivering urgent marketing reports. Evelyn, who had only a vague notion of Sienna's existence as a trusted consultant, greeted her politely. She offered tea in the sunlit parlor, genuinely curious about Sienna's role in Alexander's business. But Sienna's gaze lingered too long on the walls adorned with family portraits, and her smiles never reached her eyes. Evelyn felt uneasy, but she brushed it off as jealousy. Perhaps Sienna was envious of her marriage. She had no clue that this woman had already shared a bed with her husband. The meeting should have been strictly business. But Sienna's gaze flickered across the living room, taking in every detail from the wedding photos to the hints of Evelyn's pregnancy. She complimented the decor, commented on the estate's history, even asked how Evelyn was feeling about impending motherhood. While the conversation was outwardly polite, underlying tension vibrated like a taut wire. Later that day, Alexander came home early. He found Sienna in his office, reviewing documents and sipping from a porcelain cup. The moment he walked in, her tone shifted. She closed the distance between them and whispered so that no one else could hear, "You can't avoid me forever." Alexander stiffened, glancing nervously at the door. He managed a frigid response that they would talk later, outside of his home. Evelyn had been passing by, carrying freshly laundered linens when she caught the exchange. She didn't hear Sienna's words, but she saw the proximity, the hush in their voices, the tension in Alexander's posture. A pang of unease shot through her. After Sienna departed, Evelyn tried to ask Alexander about the nature of their conversation. He brushed it off, saying Sienna was simply upset over a failed business pitch, but the explanation felt thin. As the weeks passed, Sienna found reasons to meet with Alexander more frequently, either at the office or in random hotels under the guise of corporate retreats. He tried to resist, but Sienna always had an excuse: an urgent contract to review, a potential deal with high stakes. Each time, she cornered him with veiled threats. "If you don't see me, I might slip and tell your wife about us." Fearful of causing Evelyn distress during her pregnancy, Alexander caved to these demands, unwittingly becoming a marionette in Sienna's puppet show. For Evelyn, the atmosphere at home changed subtly. She sensed Alexander's stress, the way his eyes drifted when they were alone, as though burdened by a confession he couldn't speak aloud. She also noticed suspicious calls at odd hours. He'd walk outside to talk in hushed tones. Rather than jump to conclusions, she dismissed these red flags, telling herself he was overwhelmed by business expansions. She was carrying his child after all. Surely her beloved husband wouldn't betray her now. But betrayal had already occurred. And soon, the ramifications of Alexander's choices and Sienna's vengeful machinations would become devastatingly clear. Evelyn's pregnancy reached its second trimester, and her world should have been filled with baby shopping, nursery preparations, and hopes for a bright future. Instead, she increasingly felt a suffocating unease. Alexander's anxiety only grew more pronounced. She saw it in the bags under his eyes, the restless nights where he tossed and turned. Tactfully, she asked if work was overwhelming him, even encouraging him to share the load. But each time she offered help, he demurred, reassuring her everything was under control. Behind this facade, Sienna's manipulations escalated. She began orchestrating chance encounters that ensured rumors would seep into high society. One night, Alexander, under the ruse of a business meeting, found himself alone with Sienna in a rooftop lounge. She had deliberately chosen a location frequented by gossip-hungry socialites. That same evening, a paparazzo snapped pictures of Alexander looking cornered while Sienna leaned in intimately, whispering in his ear. Within days, tabloids splashed headlines about the mystery woman in the billionaire's life. Sienna leaked just enough clues to stoke speculation, but not enough to confirm an affair. When Evelyn confronted Alexander about the photographs, he stammered through a vague explanation about client relationships. Disturbed, but still wanting to trust him, Evelyn accepted his words with a heavy heart. Yet, a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. She wished she could talk to Gregory Cunningham for guidance, but his health had taken a turn for the worse. Confined to his room and drifting in and out of consciousness, he was in no condition for serious conversation. As family and doctors attended to Gregory, Evelyn felt more alone than ever. From her vantage point, Sienna decided it was time to set her grand plan in motion. She needed not just to tear Alexander away from Evelyn, but to ensure Evelyn was out of the picture completely. Searching for weaknesses, Sienna discovered that a longtime friend of Evelyn's, Rosalind Porter, served as the estate's occasional counsel, assisting with legal matters relating to staff and property disputes. Rosalind had visited the mansion frequently since Evelyn's pregnancy, providing emotional support. Cunningly, Sienna planned an elaborate trap. She would need a victim, a plausible motive, and a set of planted evidence linking Evelyn to murder. Rosalind Porter became the unfortunate pawn. Perhaps in Sienna's twisted logic, removing Rosalind would be a double victory. She'd eliminate a protective figure in Evelyn's life, and also create circumstances that would incriminate Evelyn beyond doubt. She arranged a secret meeting with one of her unsavory contacts, a private investigator known for forging documents and staging scandals. They discussed forging documents that suggested Rosalind was embezzling funds from the Cunningham estate and that Evelyn had just discovered the crime. Sienna's plan was to lure Rosalind to an isolated location, orchestrate her death, and carefully stage evidence implicating Evelyn as the vengeful murderer. Dark as it was, Sienna believed this plan would sever Evelyn from Alexander once and for all. And so began the prelude to murder, a twisted symphony of cunning, jealousy, and betrayal that would soon destroy an innocent life. On a foggy autumn evening, Sienna set her plan into action. She called Rosalind under the guise of wanting legal advice on a sensitive business matter concerning Alexander's interests. Rosalind, ever concerned about Evelyn's well-being and suspecting something was off, agreed to meet Sienna at a secluded cafe on the outskirts of the city. From there, Sienna claimed they would drive to a private property to discuss confidential documents away from prying eyes. Rosalind never returned from that meeting. Under the cover of darkness, Sienna had lured Rosalind to an abandoned lakeside cabin, claiming it was owned by the marketing firm for discreet off-site gatherings. In reality, it was a decrepit structure far removed from civilization. The caretaker for the property, bribed and intimidated, had turned a blind eye. Once inside, Rosalind grew uneasy. The place looked barely habitable. She questioned Sienna, who feigned innocence. It was then that a masked accomplice emerged, forcibly subduing Rosalind. The last thing Rosalind saw was Sienna's cold, triumphant stare. Sienna's accomplice planted carefully crafted evidence, documents bearing Evelyn's forged signature, referencing legal threats against Rosalind. Snippets of text messages, fabricated and time-stamped, were set to be discovered later, suggesting Rosalind had threatened to expose Evelyn for some fictional crime, and that Evelyn had responded with violent intent. In a final, chilling act, Sienna arranged for Rosalind's lifeless body to be found in such a way that suggested a desperate struggle, one in which Evelyn, presumably, had the motive to end Rosalind's life before any potential secrets could be unveiled. With Rosalind gone, the next step was to ensure the authorities found the right clues. The payoff to the accomplice and the caretaker ensured they would point law enforcement in Evelyn's direction. Overnight, a quiet lake cabin became a crime scene brimming with false evidence. Within days, the police came knocking at the estate. Evelyn was beside herself with shock and grief when the detectives arrived. They bore official warrants to search her home office. Alexander, outraged, demanded to know the meaning of this. The lead detective explained that Rosalind Porter was dead, murdered, and overwhelming evidence implicated Evelyn. Stunned and trembling, Evelyn could only stutter. I would never hurt Rosalind. She was my friend." Yet the planted texts, the forged documents, and even a set of footprints that matched Evelyn's shoe-size Sienna had stolen a pair from the estate weeks earlier, painted a damning picture. Alexander vehemently defended his wife, but the evidence left him confused and unsure. Why were there messages from Evelyn to Rosalind referencing blackmail? Why did documents show Evelyn signing off on secret money transfers? It defied everything he knew about his wife, but it was all right there in front of him. The press, already suspicious about the tension in the Cunningham household, had a field day. Headlines flashed: billionaire's pregnant wife suspected in brutal murder of longtime friend. Through it all, Sienna played the concerned professional, offering Alexander support in the midst of this public crisis. Even as Evelyn was carted away in handcuffs, Sienna managed to stand by Alexander's side at press conferences, wearing a mask of sorrow and quiet outrage on his behalf. The trap had sprung, and the pregnant wife, innocent though she was, found herself in a living nightmare. The case went to trial in an atmosphere of sensationalism. Media vans lined the courthouse steps, and reporters shouted questions at Alexander, who arrived each day looking increasingly distraught. Evelyn, wearing maternity clothes that could not conceal her growing belly, stood accused of first-degree murder. Despite her reputable background, public opinion was split. Some believed a personal feud or jealousy had driven her to kill, while others suspected a conspiracy. Unfortunately, the manufactured evidence seemed too convincing for most to ignore. The prosecution laid out a narrative of financial impropriety. They presented documents allegedly discovered in Evelyn's personal files indicating Rosalind had stumbled upon irregularities in the estate's accounts, implicating Evelyn in embezzlement. According to these false records, Rosalind had threatened to reveal Evelyn's wrongdoing, prompting an enraged Evelyn to act violently. It was a story that left Evelyn devastated. She tried to explain it made no sense. She had no reason to embezzle money when she was married to Alexander, whose resources were open to her. The explanation fell on skeptical ears. Alexander employed the best defense team money could buy, yet each piece of evidence was carefully planted to weave an intricate web of guilt. The text messages, for instance, showed a conversation that never took place, but the digital forensics, manipulated through a corrupt specialist on Sienna's payroll, could not prove it was fabricated. Witnesses bribed to recall arguments they claimed to have overheard testified that Evelyn had publicly admonished Rosalind during a gathering. Never mind, these arguments never happened. The judge had no reason to doubt these upstanding citizens in reality, stooges of Sienna. As the weeks wore on, Evelyn's mental and physical health deteriorated. She was forced to remain in custody, though the court allowed her special medical accommodations due to her pregnancy. At night, she wept in a stark cell, fearing for her unborn child's future. She wrote letters to Alexander, professing her innocence, describing her anguish, and begging him to believe her. He read them with a breaking heart, torn between the love he felt for his wife and the avalanche of circumstantial evidence that defied logic. Through it all, Sienna continued to offer Alexander a supportive shoulder. She cultivated an image as his trusted ally, speaking to the press with carefully measured sympathy. Behind closed doors, she insisted Evelyn must be guilty. Why else would the evidence be so overwhelming? Alexander, in his darkest moments, began to question everything he believed he knew. Guilt gnawed at him for the affair, but he found himself powerless to unravel the mystery that had trapped his wife. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty of first-degree murder, Evelyn nearly collapsed. She clutched her swollen stomach, tears streaming down her face as the courtroom erupted in murmurs. No one seemed to hear her anguished cry, "I'm innocent!" The judge's final pronouncement was that Evelyn Cunningham was to be remanded into custody until after the birth of her child, at which time a formal sentence would be handed down. In that moment, the world saw a tragic figure, a young, pregnant woman condemned to live out the worst nightmare imaginable. Sienna, meanwhile, watched with triumphant eyes. She had orchestrated every detail perfectly, not just shattering Evelyn's life, but also drawing Alexander ever closer into her toxic web. But karma, as they say, has a long memory. Evelyn settled into a routine of bleak despair at the Women's Correctional Facility. Initially placed in the medical wing due to her pregnancy, she endured invasive checkups, harsh stares from guards who had read headlines labeling her a monster, and the suffocating feeling of being both physically confined and morally convicted for a crime she never committed. Every night, she battled insomnia, haunted by the memory of Rosalind's kind face and the knowledge that someone had engineered this vicious lie to pin Rosalind's death on her. There were small mercies. A sympathetic nurse named Carla, who ensured Evelyn received proper prenatal vitamins, a chaplain who stopped by once a week to offer words of hope, and occasional visits from Alexander. His visits were emotionally charged. He would hold her hand through the bars, tears in his eyes, promising to hire new investigators to find the truth. Yet, day after day, no new evidence surfaced. Evelyn tried to be strong for her unborn child, but each passing week without progress felt like another nail sealing her fate. Alexander, outside the prison walls, found himself increasingly reliant on Sienna. With Gregory Cunningham gravely ill, Alexander had no family support system. While some longtime family friends empathized with him, many distanced themselves, wary of the scandal. Sienna capitalized on this isolation, moving herself into Alexander's circle as a business consultant, a crisis manager, and a friend who was just there to help. Publicly, the press questioned why Sienna appeared side by side with Alexander so often, but she spun it as loyalty to a valued client in dire circumstances. In truth, she was tightening her grip on Alexander, expecting him to declare his love for her, now that Evelyn was effectively out of the picture. Behind bars, Evelyn clung to any shred of hope. She wrote letters to the judge, detailing inconsistencies in the evidence. She pleaded with old colleagues from her law firm for help. Over time, a few concerned parties began to suspect foul play. An old friend from the legal community, Marcus Flynn, started his own independent investigation. Though resources were limited, he pored over financial records, phone logs, and digital footprints. Something about the case felt too perfect, too orchestrated. However, for every questionable lead he found, there was a dead end waiting. Sienna had made sure the trail was well covered. As Evelyn's due date approached, her health came under closer scrutiny. The prison wardens worried about potential complications, given her elevated stress. She was transferred to a local hospital's secure wing, awaiting the birth under constant guard. She feared the very real possibility that she would deliver her baby alone, only to have the infant taken away immediately. The thought of losing not just her freedom, but also her child, threatened to destroy her spirit altogether. Yet, amidst this darkness, Evelyn held on to a kernel of faith that the truth would eventually rise. She had no idea that her downfall was but a piece of a larger puzzle, orchestrated by a woman whose capacity for cruelty seemed boundless, and that fate, ever watchful, was patiently waiting for its chance to restore balance. As fate would have it, Evelyn's labor began under dramatic circumstances. She was in her hospital bed, dozing fitfully, when intense contractions gripped her midsection. The prison guards alerted the medical staff, who rushed in to help. The hours of labor were agonizing, a mixture of physical torment and emotional heartbreak. Fear coursed through Evelyn's mind. Would she even get to hold her baby? Alexander arrived just in time, having been notified by the hospital. Despite the tension and the armed guard by the door, the medical staff allowed him to stay by Evelyn's side. He held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, tears in his eyes as she fought through each contraction. After what felt like an eternity, Evelyn brought a baby girl into the world. The tiny newborn cried out, unaware of the turmoil surrounding her birth. For a fleeting moment, everything else receded. Alexander kissed Evelyn's damp forehead, awe-struck by their daughter's fragile beauty. Evelyn, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispered, "Our baby girl." She felt a surge of unconditional love that momentarily eclipsed the injustice crushing her. She named the baby Abigail, a name she had cherished since childhood. But as soon as Evelyn was stable, reality crashed down again. A female prison guard entered the room, flanked by a hospital social worker. Formalities dictated that Abigail could not remain with a convicted murderer. Alexander demanded to take custody of his daughter, and the social worker agreed to place Abigail in his care. Evelyn handed the swaddled infant to him with trembling arms, sorrow etched across her face. She barely had time to kiss Abigail's forehead before the staff escorted the infant away. Over the next couple of days, Evelyn remained in the hospital to recover under guard, longing for her baby. She could only see Abigail during brief, supervised visits. The heartbreak was nearly unbearable. Each time she touched her daughter's little fingers, she wanted to sob and beg anyone to see the truth of her innocence. Outside the hospital, Sienna wasted no time insinuating herself into Alexander's life as he cared for the newborn. She visited the mansion often, ostensibly to discuss business strategies and help with crisis management regarding Evelyn's conviction. In reality, she was planting herself in Alexander's domestic sphere. She'd rock baby Abigail, cooing softly, as if trying to replace Evelyn's role entirely. Alexander, depleted and emotionally raw, was too overwhelmed to question her intentions. At times, he even felt grateful for her help, given that he was a single father in a chaotic storm of scandal. Yet, each time Sienna held Abigail, a darker purpose glimmered behind her gentle smile. She believed she had succeeded in erasing Evelyn's presence. Soon enough, she thought, Alexander would be free to marry her, and then everything, the fortune, the influence, even fatherhood would be under her control. Evelyn's unborn child had been a mere inconvenience, but Sienna reasoned that raising the billionaire's baby might only strengthen her ties to him. Little did she know, however, that the very child she held in her arms was part of a destiny that would unravel her carefully plotted scheme. Back at the prison, Evelyn descended into postpartum depression. She had carried her baby for 9 months, dreaming of a shared life, yet she was locked away from her child's milestones. Letters from Alexander were her only lifeline, describing Abigail's coups and first smiles. Occasionally, he'd include a photo of the infant. Though it warmed Evelyn's heart to see her child growing, it also felt like a cruel reminder of what she was missing. Inside Alexander's circle, an unexpected shift began. Gregory Cunningham, on what doctors called his deathbed, rallied enough strength to ask questions about the trial. Though often bedridden, his mind was still sharp. He inquired why the evidence against Evelyn had seemed almost too perfect. He pressed Alexander to investigate further. Despite his frailty, Gregory demanded that a private detective he trusted be brought on the case. Concerned for his father's fragile health, Alexander relented. This private detective was a retired FBI agent named Samuel Armitage. Known for his tenacity, Armitage sifted through every detail with fresh eyes. Where others saw a closed case, Armitage saw anomalies. The footprints, supposedly matching Evelyn's size, did not account for the width of her feet. The digital messages, while damning, lacked the random personal details real conversations often carried. And the caretaker of that lakeside property? He vanished right after Rosalind's murder. These discrepancies began pointing to a grand orchestration. Meanwhile, Sienna found her own life taking an unanticipated turn. She had aligned her entire future around Alexander, expecting him to quickly divorce or annul his marriage to a convicted murderer. Yet, weeks and months passed, and Alexander still hadn't initiated divorce proceedings. He was entirely devoted to caring for Abigail and dealing with his father's failing health. As Sienna tried to pry her way into the family circle cooking meals, rearranging the mansion's decor, she realized Gregory Cunningham's animosity toward her. He might have been too weak to speak openly against her, but his eyes burned with distrust whenever she entered his room. Feeling cornered, Sienna intensified her manipulations, urging Alexander to declare Evelyn incompetent or to take legal action to remove her parental rights. Alexander resisted, citing Evelyn's emotional connection to Abigail. He insisted the child needed her mother at least in some capacity. This frustrated Sienna to no end. In her bitterness, she started lashing out, letting glimpses of her true nature slip. She snapped at staff, belittled them for minor mistakes. Rumors spread that Sienna was controlling and harsh. Still, Alexander remained in an emotional fog. His father's precarious condition weighed on him, as did the responsibility of single parenthood. He desperately wanted to believe in Evelyn's innocence, but he was haunted by the mountain of fabricated evidence. Every moment he felt torn between his convictions and the illusions carefully spun around him. But the tides were beginning to shift. Samuel Armitage's quiet investigation hinted that something was not right. Gregory Cunningham, though frail, was determined to see his beloved daughter-in-law vindicated. In the background, the forces of karma were stirring, preparing to bring long-overdue justice to Evelyn and a merciless reckoning to the puppet master who thought she could keep her crimes hidden forever. As Samuel Armitage's investigation progressed, he discovered a crucial piece of evidence, a forged email chain between Evelyn and Rosalind. The language in these emails was stilted, filled with phrases Evelyn would never use. Armitage also found that the metadata timestamps had been altered, something a skilled hacker could do, but it left behind digital signatures that indicated tampering. He presented his findings to Alexander in a private meeting. Alexander listened, face pale, hands trembling on the table. For the first time, tangible proof suggested Evelyn had been set up. Armitage recommended speaking with the caretaker of the lakeside property, who had fled to another state. Armitage tracked the man down, finally persuading him to reveal how a mysterious woman with dark hair and green eyes had paid him a large sum to disappear and say nothing. The caretaker also recalled hearing the name Sienna during a phone conversation. He had been too frightened to come forward earlier, fearing retaliation. Now, with Armitage's assurance of protection, he was willing to testify. Armed with this information, Alexander confronted Sienna at the mansion. She scoffed, feigning disbelief. "You can't trust some random caretaker," she snapped, crossing her arms, but Alexander noticed her eyes flicker with panic. For the first time, she seemed out of control. When he demanded that she leave, Sienna pivoted to threats. She warned that if he ruined her reputation, she would release more incriminating documents, possibly framing him alongside Evelyn. Shocked by her audacity, Alexander was left speechless. Sienna stormed out, her posture stiff with rage. That same night, Gregory Cunningham's condition deteriorated rapidly. Doctors said it was only a matter of hours or days. Summoning all his courage, Alexander went to his father's bedside and told him about the caretaker's testimony. Gregory, breathing with difficulty, gripped Alexander's hand and whispered, "Clear her name. Do it. For your child." Those words galvanized Alexander into action. With Armitage's help, he planned to file a motion for a new trial, presenting the caretaker's testimony and the evidence of digital tampering. Word of the caretaker's confession found its way to the press, causing a stir. Speculations ran wild about a shadowy figure behind the murder. Some media outlets even suggested Sienna Royce by name, citing her suspicious closeness to Alexander and Evelyn's known distrust of her. Sienna, cornered by these rumors, went on the offensive. She gave a televised interview, claiming people were trying to smear her, that she had always been a loyal ally to the Cunninghams. But her performance felt unconvincing, lacking the polished composure she usually displayed. Behind bars, Evelyn heard the news through her friend Marcus Flynn. She felt a spark of hope. Could this be the path to her exoneration? She prayed for a miracle, tears of relief, mingling with the lingering fear that Sienna might strike back before justice could be served. In the thick of this unraveling chaos, a final twist awaited. Fate, it seemed, was about to deliver the ultimate blow, and that blow would come from a place no one expected. Amid the upheaval, Sienna's own health took a sudden, startling turn. An underlying heart condition, one she had concealed for years, flared up, perhaps exacerbated by the stress. She collapsed in her penthouse apartment, alone and terrified, her heart racing uncontrollably. By the time paramedics arrived, she was unresponsive. Rushed to the hospital, she slipped in and out of consciousness. The doctors managed to stabilize her, but the prognosis was dire. She was dying. In her lucid moments, Sienna realized her carefully built empire of lies was collapsing around her. Armitage's investigation, the caretaker's confession, and mounting public suspicion meant she might face prison if she recovered. Worse, she feared dying alone, unrepentant, with the guilt of murder on her soul. She requested to see Alexander, a final demand that stunned the medical staff. Unsure whether to comply, Alexander hesitated. But when the doctors explained Sienna likely had only hours to live, he agreed, accompanied by Armitage as a witness. He walked into the hushed hospital room, the machines beeping softly, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across Sienna's gaunt face. She looked diminished, no trace of the elegant woman who once commanded boardrooms. Her eyes flickered with shame and sorrow. She beckoned Alexander closer, her voice weak. "Alexander, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never intended it to go this far." A rasping cough halted her speech. Alexander stood there, stoic, waiting. Armitage quietly recorded the conversation, having obtained permission from the hospital staff. Between tortured breaths, Sienna confessed everything. She admitted to orchestrating Rosalind's murder, forging the evidence to frame Evelyn. She acknowledged her hidden accomplice, the caretaker's bribery, and the digital tampering. Tears slid down her cheeks as she described her twisted reasoning, how she felt overshadowed by Evelyn, desperate to secure Alexander and his fortune, resentful of Evelyn's pregnancy. In that moment, Alexander's fury and sorrow merged into something colder, more profound. Still, he managed to maintain composure. This confession would exonerate Evelyn. Yet, hearing how easily Sienna had destroyed innocent lives chilled him to the core. He asked, voice breaking, "Why did you do it? You knew I loved Evelyn." Sienna's eyes fell shut, her breath shallower by the second. "I wanted your world, your name, your child, everything," she managed. Regret contorted her features. "I never thought it would weigh on me like this." Then, with a trembling hand, she pressed a small flash drive into Alexander's palm. "Backup of everything," she wheezed. "Proof you need." Moments later, Sienna sank back against the pillows, a tremor passing through her body. The beeping from the monitors grew erratic. Medical staff rushed in, but it was too late. Sienna Royce exhaled her last breath, carrying her heartbreak and envy into the unknown. Alexander stood there, numb, as Armitage ended the recording. The full weight of Sienna's words settled in. At last, the truth had emerged, not from law books or cunning detectives alone, but from a dying woman's final, desperate confession. Evelyn could finally be freed. Yet, the cost had been immeasurable: a close friend murdered, a child born into tragedy, and a family shattered by deception. With Sienna's recorded confession and the flash drive in hand, Alexander and Armitage moved swiftly. They contacted Evelyn's defense attorneys, who filed an immediate appeal for reversal of her conviction. The new evidence was overwhelming. Sienna had admitted to framing Evelyn, and the digital records on the flash drive corroborated her every word. Within days, the case took a dramatic turn. Prosecutors announced that they would drop all charges against Evelyn Cunningham and expunge her record. The judge signed the necessary documents, and just like that, Evelyn's innocence stood vindicated. That day, Alexander arrived at the prison with official paperwork, tears in his eyes as he watched the guards unlock the cell door. Dressed in a plain jumpsuit, her hair thinner and eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, Evelyn stepped out in disbelief. As soon as she saw him, she rushed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The moment felt surreal, a sudden and long-awaited victory after months of crushing despair. Outside, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, along with a few loyal friends who never stopped believing in Evelyn's innocence. Cameras clicked rapidly as the couple emerged, hand in hand, tears still wet on their cheeks. For once, the tabloid headlines were sympathetic. Wrongly convicted mother freed, truth exposed in high society murder. Marcus Flynn and Samuel Armitage stood nearby, offering words of relief and congratulation. A sense of communal catharsis filled the air. Later that night, Alexander took Evelyn to see their daughter. Abigail, now several months old, reached out tiny hands in curiosity as her mother held her for the first time outside a prison setting. Evelyn wept at how much the child had grown. She marveled at the soft coos, the bright eyes that gazed back at her. In that tender moment, she felt more gratitude than she could express for life, for justice, and for the future she still had a chance to shape. Gregory Cunningham, too, lived just long enough to see Evelyn cleared of all charges. When Evelyn entered his room, he mustered a small smile, relief evident in his sunken eyes. He took her hand, his voice barely a whisper. "I knew you were innocent. So glad you're home." He died peacefully the following day, comforted by the knowledge that his granddaughter would not grow up with her mother behind bars. In the days that followed, Alexander publicly acknowledged his own failings. He owned up to the affair, expressing deep remorse for how his indiscretions had paved the way for Sienna's manipulations. While the public showed some scorn for his betrayal, they also recognized the tragedy he had endured. Though forgiveness wouldn't come easily, Evelyn's unwavering love and the sanctity of family provided a path toward healing. As for Sienna, her ashes remained unclaimed in a cold morgue for weeks. Eventually, Distant relatives arranged a modest ceremony. No one from the Cunningham family attended. Her story ended not in triumph, but in a poignant cautionary tale of how far envy and greed can carry someone before karmic retribution finally intervenes. Life after the storm was not without challenges, but it was a new beginning for Evelyn, Alexander, and their precious Abigail. The estate, once a backdrop for deception, slowly transformed into a genuine home. Evelyn took charge of philanthropic projects again, this time focusing on helping wrongfully convicted individuals. Inspired by her own harrowing ordeal, she set up a fund named after Rosalind Porter, ensuring her friend's tragic demise would save others from similar injustices. Alexander, for his part, worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. He dismantled the marketing firm where Sienna had worked, unearthing more evidence of her unscrupulous dealings. He apologized publicly not just to Evelyn, but to Rosalind's family, whose grief was immeasurable. Over time, his sincerity softened some of the resentment people felt toward him. Though he could never undo the past, he resolved to use his wealth and influence more responsibly. In the corporate world, rumors abounded about the curse of Sienna's ambition. Several former associates who had assisted her in forging evidence or covering tracks found themselves under investigation. Some faced charges for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice. One by one, they fell from their positions of comfort, forced to contend with the same legal system they had once manipulated. It seemed, indeed, that karma was wide-reaching, leaving no stone unturned. For Evelyn, the healing process was both physical and emotional. Nightmares still haunted her. Sometimes she'd wake in a cold sweat, reliving the moment of her wrongful arrest or hearing the clang of prison doors in her mind. Yet each dawn brought renewed faith in the love of her family. Holding Abigail close, she would remind herself how precious freedom was, how fleeting life could be, and how important it was to cherish every untainted moment. Alexander's guilt, though softened, remained a heavy burden. He attended marriage counseling sessions with Evelyn, determined to prove his fidelity and devotion. Uncertain at first, Evelyn gradually let him back into her heart, building a deeper, more honest bond than before. As time passed, they found themselves forging a new foundation, one built on transparency, respect, and mutual understanding. Their journey wasn't easy, but each small victory in their relationship felt like a testament to their resilience. And so, the once shattered Cunningham family learned to live again. Their story became a stark reminder that love, when tested by betrayal and tragedy, can either crumble or emerge stronger. Evelyn and Alexander chose the latter. Bound by their child, the memory of a beloved father, and the luminous spirit of a friend lost too soon, they carried on with renewed purpose. The downfall of Sienna Royce stood as a testament to the ultimate law of cause and effect. No matter how carefully one spins a web of lies, truth has a way of breaking through, and when it does, it arrives with uncompromising force. From a prison cell to a tearful homecoming, from a mistress's cunning plot to a confession on her deathbed, the tapestry of life had woven tragedy and hope into a single, bitter-sweet tale. In the end, justice prevailed, love survived, and karma delivered its final blow to those who dared manipulate fate for personal gain. In the end, the truth outshone every lie, and justice found its rightful place even when it seemed too late. Sienna Royce's twisted ambition and bitter jealousy led to her own destruction, proving once more that no amount of cunning can outrun karma forever. Evelyn, wrongfully accused and separated from her newborn child, emerged with her freedom reclaimed and her family's future ahead of her. Yet, her battle scars remain a poignant reminder of life's unpredictability and the cost of misplaced trust. If you found yourself caught up in this riveting tale of deceit, betrayal, and ultimate redemption, please like this video, share it with friends who love dramatic twists, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Your support helps keep these stories alive, reminding us that, even in the darkest moments, truth and hope can triumph. Thank you for watching.